What's up everybody? I'm back again for another install video from Lowbrow Customs. My name's Tim and I'm going to be showing you how to install this mess of a wiring harness on your fuel injected Sportster chopper. So we have a new wiring harness. It fits 07 to 13 fuel injected Sportsters. It's mostly designed around a Gasbox full frame, but it's not exclusive to be used on a full frame. It can fit other things, but there's a couple parts that you're going to have to mount in similar locations to be able to run it the same on your chopper build. One of those parts being the computer, and another part being the fuse box, which you can't see right now, but it mounts inside the tunnel of the oil tank. So since those mount in specific locations and are kind of located by the wiring harness, I would suggest purchasing one while you're in process of building your bike to make it easy and locating certain parts, and then so there's no guessing when you go to put your bike back together on final assembly. So this wiring harness is going to be 90% plug and play application since it uses your stock connectors. There's a couple spots that you're going to be left to customize, but we left you long wire whips to be able to locate these things where you want to put them. All of them being your headlight, your tail light, and your brake light switch. But like I said, there's going to be long leads in here. This is one of them. And you're just going to have to tie it in to where you want to go. So I want to say this harness is for a custom application, but all of your colors are going to match your stock harness. So if you have any trouble figuring out where things are going to plug in, you're going to be able to refer back to your stock Harley manual, or we have a climber manual on the website that you'll be able to use to help you figure out how to install this. Show the dirty page. You're going to be using this.
A lot.
Yeah, dude. Before I get to hanging this on the bike, I would like to talk to you about security. So I'm going to grab the computer and a couple things just to show you, because there's a couple important things that I need to talk about. So before we get moving with installing this on the bike, I really need to talk to you about security. This is really important for you to not skip this step when you start your chopper build. This would be better to handle while your bike is still stock, because you might need to take your bike to a dealership to get this resolved. And if you show up with something like this, you might get kicked out, which is what happened to me. So one thing you're gonna have to figure out first on your bike is if you have security or not, because they both have a plug that looks like this. One is the turn signal module, one is the turn signal security module. If you've got an antenna hanging from it, you definitely have security, especially if you got a key fob. But if you have just a turn signal module, it'll look just like this. It won't have an antenna, and I'm pretty sure it does not have a plug for it. But you're gonna have to figure out whether or not you have security first, because you're gonna wanna deal with the security before you start cutting stuff apart. The first and probably the easiest way to deal with this is to take, if you have your bike and it's still stock, it runs, the battery, everything's hooked up so you could turn it on and use the turn signals. You take your bike to Harley so they can actually remove the security from your computer. And then you put this in a box. I wouldn't suggest getting rid of it in case, I don't know if the computer's learning and the security could kick back onto your computer at some point. You might need to deal with it again. I would save this just in a box. It's not worth anything, but just don't throw it away. Hold on to this stuff and then that stuff will be resolved and you can get to cutting up your wiring harness. So say you jumped ahead and you already customized your bike and you've got the wiring harness hung on there and you can't get it to run. The symptoms of your bike having security and being disabled is your bike will start up perfect and run for almost like 2 seconds only and then instantly die. And it'll do that very consistently every time you start it. And if you run into this issue, your bike the security's working and it's keeping you from being able to ride. So if you run into this instance, I definitely wouldn't suggest going Harley if your bike's a chopper now. There's a couple things that you could do to easily resolve this situation. One being, if you still have all of your components, you're in luck because there's an easy way for you to get around it. If all of your parts work together, set your key fob, your antenna, your TSSM, all from your stock bike. If your bike was running before and you knew that it all worked together, you'll be able to plug this in to your 12-pin Deutsch plug connector, start your bike up, and it'll start and run just fine. And then while it's running, you can unplug it, your bike will stay running, and then you can shut it off and test it, turn it back on, and it'll start and fire and run just fine. I'm pretty sure the computer is learning and will learn that it does not need any of these components. But if you let your bike die for an extended period of time, it will reset back to the factory default and you'll need to do this all over again. It's a great option because of its simplicity, but you'll definitely have to hold on to these things, and it's a little troublesome, say if you're away from these parts, you'll have to worry about not being able to ride your bike. So if you don't want to worry about your battery dying and your security just being turned on at some point, one of the easiest ways is you could just go on the internet and purchase a new computer from a same size displacement Sportster without security. And doing so, you'll be able to just plug this thing in, start your bike, and ride away. There is still a data link on the wiring harness for you to be able to plug this thing into a computer to modify the tune. I haven't tried it, but it should be able to, if you bought one of these like if you had a 1200 and you bought one from an 883, to be able to modify it, because it's the same plug. I believe it's the same computer. It just needs to be modified, the tune between the 883 and the 1200. The Harley dealer is going to tell you that the computer needs to be mated to everything on your bike. You're not going to be able to run this without a turn signal module and turn signals and a dash and all this stuff, and this is untrue. We changed the way the wiring harness works to be able to eliminate all these components. So in doing my research, I figured out a couple other ways where you could still take this to a dealership if you've already taken your motorcycle totally apart. So you're not going to be using any of the stock harness anymore. If you took your bike apart and you were able to dismantle it without cutting everything all apart, you could kind of hook up like a mock motorcycle with plugging in your computer, hook it up to a battery, have your handlebars on there with the switches and turn signals and the speedometer. You've got your turn signal module plugged in, so your whole harness with everything plugged in as if it was a stock bike, and the battery hooked up so when you turn the key, all the lights were able to light up. And then you take that to the dealership, they would be able to turn off your security by plugging into the data link and accessing your computer like that. It might be worse than bringing them a chopper, but if you go to the right dealership, it would be the same as bringing them a bike. The other way is if you had a friend that had a stock motorcycle, you could plug in your computer, your TSSM and key fob and antenna onto their motorcycle, bring it in, have them disable security that way, and then when you get home, just unplug everything, put it on your bike, which you would only need the computer at that point. It would be just the same as if you showed up with your motorcycle. Like I said before, Harley's going to say that all those things need to be mated together with the motor and all this stuff, and it just doesn't work that way, and you don't need to have all those steps. But it shouldn't be that hard to find somebody else that may have a bike that you could use if you're in that situation. Don't forget that your key fob has a battery inside, so if this battery is dead, that'll also give you problems when you try to start this bike. So like I said before, make sure that everything's good and working together, and this is a good battery in here, because you might have problems trying to get this to start and unplug your TSSM, but it might actually be the battery is dead. So like I said before, this wiring harness is designed around Gasbox full frames for rubber mounted Sportsters, but it's not exclusive to. So you'll just have to mount things in a similar fashion, but a lot of these parts you'll be able to buy, say like the battery, and be able to mount it right in your frame exactly in the same location that I have here. This was designed around this specific motorcycle, so I already have the wiring harness on here and it's a running bike. And before I take this off, I just want to show you a couple places that you'll have to mount things and just like locate them so that it works the same as how I have on my bike. The battery just bolts right in. If you are running a Gasbox full frame, you'll be able to buy the components just to locate the battery in this location. And just above it, you can see the computer mounted on the fender. We have a fender mount. This will come with 4 bolts and 4 spacers for you to be able to mount your computer onto the fender, a weld-on application, welding the backing plate onto the fender, and everything you need to cover that up. When I take that one off, we actually mount that one on there. I'll show you all the pieces and how it stacks up with your computer to mount it to your fender. Just above that, on the seat tube, in the tunnel of the oil tank, we have mounted the fuse box, which is just a really good location on the back of the seat tube, tucked in a way you can't even see it, but you still have access to it. If you roll the seat forward, you'll be able to pull the fuse box out and get access to check your fuses, relays, also while staying totally hidden. So we have a couple things coming up to just the top of the motor. We have all your fuel injection components and the key on the back side. The fuel injection components are going to be where they're gonna go. There's not really, there's no room for customizing there. The key, we made a choice for you to go and use a top motor mount. If you wanna be able to move that around to locate in other spots, you could do so. You'll just have to extend wires, but we wanted to give you a really clean spot to be able to mount your key. It's right on the top of the motor with your coil and everything just neat and tidy. Everything else is gonna be located just by the stock connectors on your motor. Say your O2 sensors, crank position sensor, the voltage regulator, everything else is going to be determined by your motor. So the only thing left for you to really figure out is your headlight, your tail light, and your brake light switch. The brake light switch is mostly figured out, but depending on what caliper that you're going to run is going to determine which brake light switch that you install. So that's mostly figured out and really easy, and I'll show you here in a few minutes. So I'm gonna strip the wiring harness off of this bike, and then I'm gonna show you how easy it is to install it back onto this motorcycle. So we've got the bike a lot apart to be able to get to access everything to lay the wiring harness on the bike. I mentioned before about the computer mount on the fender. I think now this is a good time to talk about it. So this is a kit that you'll be able to find on the website. It comes with a backing plate to mount the computer to. It has 4 spacers that will just space off the top of this mounting surface to be able to put a cover over the top nicely, because we got the fins and then part of the plug to contend with. So the spacers are just to make a standoff for the lid. The lid is also a part of the kit, and it comes unwelded. The one you can see that I'm using on the bike, I welded this up. It doesn't exactly need to be welded, and being that this is a fab part that you'll have to weld onto your fender, you can weld this if you want, or you don't need to if you can't or don't want to weld the aluminum. There's one thing about this plate that you need to pay attention to, is it is directional, and the computer can only bolt to it one way. As you can see on the computer, the bottom of by the plug, this little tab is a little longer on one side. I'm not sure why Harley did that, and in my opinion, they definitely had room to make it a little higher, unless they just wanted to make it bolt in one way, and that was their solution. I'm not really sure why they did this, but you definitely want to make sure to bolt this computer to your plate to make sure that you are going to be welding this in the right orientation on your fender. I have a little notch on the plate, and you can see it on the left side, but this mount is just the slightest bit lower than this hole over here. Definitely double check, bolt your computer to it just to make sure, so that you weld this to your fender in the right spot. But this is just slightly bent and loosely has about the same radius as what you were going to be using on your fender, but since you have a lot of choices of fenders to choose from, you might have to just grind a little bit to get it to fit a little nicer, or you might just have a little bit more gap to fill in a couple spots, but it all gets covered up by the aluminum cover. So even if it's just slightly a little bit more of a gap, it's also just holding on something pretty light. So you should be able to weld this no problem. This is where the battery mounts, and it's just slightly above the battery on the fender, tucked away and hidden. So once this is wired up, at least from the A side, you won't really see it. On the B side, the plug for this comes out on this side, and so you got a little bit of a wire going up to it, but you're not fooling anybody. This is a fuel injected bike, so you will be able to see a decent amount of these wires, but we tried to keep them as clean and tidy as we could with trying to hide 36 pin connectors and that many wires coming out of different locations. This is what I was talking about, what you're gonna wanna need the wiring harness like loosely mocked up on your bike to be able to find its location on the fender. As always, don't forget to use some Loctite. The stack up for this is a little tricky. I sometimes like to do this upside down, throw your spacers in. Don't forget about the spacers, because that computer will be loose in there. Then your computer, and then we're gonna lightly slip it into place on that mount. Okay, computer's on. So the computer is one thing that needs to be mounted in a certain spot, and the fuse box is also the other thing that I was talking about that needs to be mounted specifically because of where it's located on the top of the seat post all the way to where it meets the backbone. So there's a mounting tab that I have a mount at the back of the backbone that corresponds to the mounting tab, but the stock ones, they come with a much smaller hole. I think it's like maybe 1/4 inch or for a number 10, but I just drilled this one out to 5/16. And being that this is a custom bike, I didn't do that for you, but if you want to mount it in the same way that I did on this bike, I would suggest drilling this out to a 5/16 hole. And then on the back of the backbone, I took a flange nut, flipped it around backwards and tapped it into the lasered profile that they have finishing off the backbone. And it taps in really nicely. And then since you're putting a flange nut in backwards, it'll stop and then you can weld it just on the outside of the flange. And it just needs to be stitched on the outside. But then that gives you a perfect location to bolt this in to the end of the backbone right at the top of the seat tube. So just in case you don't know what a flange nut is, it's like a lock nut and has a light flange on it with little grippers, but you can tap the nut in and then the flange will get the edge because the flange is larger than the ID of that hole. Tap it in and then you can just weld it on the other side. And then that gives you a perfect mount to be able to mount the fuse box to. You can see on this one I use silicon bronze, which is a nice trick because if you tried to weld this with steel rod, you would have to get this material too hot and the zinc would come back at you in like a spit or spatter when you're trying to weld it with TIG. But if you use silicon bronze, it has such a low melting point that it doesn't affect the zinc and you'll be able to weld this clean without messing with your tungsten. So I just wanted to show you the inside of the fuse box. There'll be a diagram that comes with the part explaining everything and what it does. We've got our 2 relays. Here's your starter relay. Here's your systems relay. Make sure they go in the proper orientation, say if you ever have to replace them. If you look on the back side, this is gonna be impossible to be able to show you on camera because the numbers are so small, but there's 30, 86, 87, and 85 are these 4 pins. And on the diagram, it's important that these pins go in the proper terminals so that the wires feed the proper spots on the relay. So make sure when you put the relays in, they're both the same. You've got the 86 in the top left corner, the 30 in the right, the 87 in the bottom left, 85 in the bottom right. Because these micro relays are able to be switched around and plugged in backwards. So just make sure you plug them in the right spot. So this is your starter relay, systems relay. These relays are the exact same relays. Then we have one 30 amp fuse, which is your main, and then the rest are 15s. This one here is for your computer. Then we have your lights, then ignition. We have a brake light switch and your fuel pump. But you can always refer back to the diagram. You should save that, the one that comes with the wiring harness. I think the easiest way for you to begin to lay this out is we're going to be focusing on this intersection right here where the seat tube meets the bottom frame rails. And so this T is going to sit right there. So this is the part going to your computer. So we got to that part's coming back up to your computer. We've got a couple things going to your battery, and this is going to your front of the bike, and then everything else is going up through the backbone. We're gonna kind of loosely mock that up. I'm gonna fish this through the tunnel of the oil tank because a lot of that stuff has got to go forward up the backbone towards the neck, and then we're gonna bolt this to the top of the backbone like I mentioned, and then we'll be able to start plugging stuff in once it's kind of loosely hung on the bike. So maybe start with all the fuel injected stuff in your headlight wires, and we're gonna kind of get those through the tunnel of the oil tank. So once you get the fuse box kind of into place, you could just bolt it in. You could have bolted it in first and then you just have to clip it in, but so I got all these wires pulled in just kind of loosely into the tunnel of the oil tank, just kind of pulled through so I can work here. We're going to be routing them eventually under this frame rail, between the frame rail and the top of the oil tank. So one of the things you're going to want to do is definitely have this thing loose. I have all the mounts out. It has oil in it and everything's hooked up, but you're not hurting anything, but just slightly moving this out of the way. And also, if you had the O2 sensor in the front pipe, it's a good idea to remove that because it'll give you much more room to be able to move this forward and have access and room to work, especially if this is a nicely painted motorcycle, which when you're wiring it most likely will be. And so it'll just give you a little bit more room so you're not trying to force anything under the tank. Because even with some clearance, some of these plugs are pretty big, so it's hard to get them underneath. When you route these, I preferred to have a couple wires going on one side and a couple on the other, because you have kind of a lot going up to the backbone, top motor mount section of the motorcycle. So we have the wires going for the key switch, coil, headlight, and we're gonna route those on the left side of the bike. This is the head tap sensor, and we're gonna route that. That's gonna go to the right side. You can kind of see the plug I already have routed. It comes from the head, and I just pull it into the top of the seat location, and that's gonna, you can just plug that in right now. It's not gonna hurt anything. And then we've got the fuel pump stuff, and that's gonna go on the left side. And then on the right side, we've got everything that's gonna go to the fuel injector, the throttle body. This is all your injector, map sensor, throttle position sensor, your fuel injectors. And so this is gonna run on the backbone on the right side. So try to route this in this area as nice as possible. So you have like 2 and 2 is maybe the easiest way. There's a lot of wires to deal with, so it's gonna be kind of a lot of stuff going on, which is nice when you just cover it up with your seat, which I would suggest running a rigid seat on a hinge. You got access to everything also is a nice feature on this. But so it's just kind of just loosely in place, and we've got this bolted up. Now we're gonna get some things connected down below, and then we're gonna come back to the top. So you're kind of jumping around when you're using this. So the battery cables are one thing that you'll have to purchase separately if you want to route them in a different way or make your own, or say you utilize something from a bike that you already had. We didn't want to give you something unnecessary that you weren't going to use. But if you like these ones, they're also available on the website, and you'll be able to see later how I had them routed. But they're the same cable, both in the kits. They come with a red shrink tube for you to be able to tell positive from negative, but each one comes with this red, so you either leave it off if it's negative, put it on if it's positive, or maybe you just remember and you don't leave it on at all because you don't want the red thing. But the one for the negative, which I have mounted on the back of the case in the stock location, this is a 14-inch cable, and then the one going to the starter, which is the positive battery cable, is an 18-inch battery cable. These are both available on the website. I just have them tied together with some shrink tube just so when this is finished and a running bike, it just routes nicely and it just gives it a clean look. So I'll show you that in a minute, how after we get everything hooked up, how nicely that looks. So kind of feeding this in right at the bottom of the T. I like to try to push them behind these nuts. It kind of gives it like really tucks it back in there. These are going to your battery. And we got your tail light and your brake light switch. So we're gonna leave that down low. One of the things you can plug in right now, plug your computer in, because that's gonna get that up and out of the way. And then so that's gonna be loose for now, and it's just gonna go under the battery box when you mount this. It'll just give you a nice loop that's gonna keep close to the battery. And you could mount this to the fender if you'd like, or you could leave it loose. Doesn't really matter that much. We've got a couple of lines. This one's going positive battery, and then we've got the negative terminal. To get the tray in, we're using one of these as the chassis ground, and that's gonna go to the battery mount. So I would take out this bolt in the back, this one here, and you can run that down. This is going to be where you locate your chassis ground. And the battery box mounts here, so you're going to need to tighten this up before we're going to be able to install that tray. Make sure this is a clean surface when you're bolting everything down, that you got metal to metal contact, so that there's going to be no arcing, or you'll be able to make a good ground, and all your lights and stuff will work. So this goes to the negative terminal on your battery and then just jumps down to be the chassis ground. So before we put the battery box on, we got the plug down below. It's a plug with 3 pins for the brake light that's going to go underneath the battery box. And as you can see, I already have this piece installed in the fender, which is the male end of the plug. And I wanted to run my wires through my fender. I have a nice rubber grommet with a few clips. It's the exact same way that I did in the Saturday Sportster Season 2, how we mounted the wires on the inside of the fender. So if you liked that route and you wanted to copy it, this is already set up to do exactly that, and you can watch that video to refer back and see exactly how I did that and do it the same way. You can run this on the outside of the sissy bar. This part comes with a long whip for these wires, so you can mount your taillight wherever you want. But if you wanted to mount it on your fender, it comes with this nice plug with a long whip to be able to route it inside your fender with clips and try to hide all those wires. And that's exactly how I did that. But so I already have that provision installed, and I'm gonna plug this in. We're gonna put the battery box over top of that. So when I installed the battery tray, I made sure the tail light was under it, and also the line, the lead for the computer is also running underneath, and gives me room for when I put the strap on, I'll be able to get the bolt in, and it'll all be tucked in there nice and neat. It gives it it just like kind of tries to hide it as best as it can. You're gonna have a lot of wires to contend with, and just when you're installing these, just try to route them and as clean as possible. Just try to focus on that. And then, so we got the wires running underneath. We've got the brake line coming through that's gonna follow the frame. And then this is the brake light switch, the wires for the brake light switch, and that's gonna route next to it. And yours are gonna be longer. Mine are cut because it was already installed on a running bike, but I'm gonna just extend those just to show you how to hook them up. But yours is gonna be it's gonna have a whip on it to be able to route. If you wanted to change this location and run it somewhere else, you'll be able to. You're not gonna be stuck with having to mount it on the caliper. Moving now a little forward, this is the plug to disable your security system, which will only be used on startup. Like I said, when you plug the stuff in and then it runs and then you unplug it. That's the only reason this plug is there. The other one is for your data link, and that's gonna be if you wanted to put a tune on your bike or be able to not a lot of places have this. You're gonna have to go to like a Harley shop or like the dealer, and they'll be able to access the inner workings of your computer with this link. So these are mostly just gonna be tied up onto your frame just out of the way, which you can do now. So we're gonna tuck these in behind the motor, and we're gonna end up strapping everything down nicely, but just get those out of the way for now. And then run this lead to the front of your bike, and all these plugs are different and pretty easy to identify. We're gonna start with the oxygen sensor for the front pipe. And now this is your voltage regulator. This part of the voltage regulator goes to your stator, which is coming from underneath your bike on the engine. This is your crank position sensor. And there's like a little plastic block in there that you have to line up with the corresponding void on the plug. So try to tuck those in as nice as you can. There's a lot of stuff to deal with. So I got the zip tied on, just strap it down nice. You can't really see, but I also zip tied the TSSM plug and the data link, just so that's not flopping around under there. I got it to the cross tube where the kickstand is welded onto. This section goes all the way across the frame, and so I strapped it down to that. So I'm going to plug in the trans speed sensor and the starter. You're not going to be able to see exactly plugging them in, or it's just a little tricky in there, so we're going to cut to some close-ups for you to be able to visualize where they go. This is where the starter is located, and this is where the plug for the starter is located. So you can see the little plug underneath the starter. You can see the blade right to the right of the white part of the connector. That's where you have to plug that in. It's really hard to show you. I'm kind of trying to move the light to show you down in there. It's a little tricky to see. You'll be able to find it on your bike though. That's right under the bottom of the starter. And so if you look at the plastic part of that plug, you can see underneath that how there's the little tang that's going to clip into it. That is the proper orientation, so that is facing the right way. That tang is on the bottom, so make sure you line that up when you plug that in. You're not going to be able to see me actually plug this in because it's in too tight of an area. We won't be able to get the camera in there. So here's a further away shot of where the trans speed sensor is located, and it's right down in here. This is where we're looking, right on the top of your trans. You can see the trans speed sensor connector right on top of the female portion where it plugs in on the top of the trans, and the clip portion is on the other side of the plug where you can't see. This is also in a tight area where you won't be able to really see me plug this in. My hands are gonna just be blocking everything. So we're trying to show you exactly what the plug looks like and where it goes. And if you have any trouble confirming what the plug is, like I said before, all the wires on this harness match your stock service manual. So refer back to the wiring diagram in your service manual if you have any questions of what a plug is. Now we're going to start running the stuff down the backbone, and like I said before, pull the O2 sensor out of the front pipe if you have the pipes installed. And we're going to move this oil tank just a little out of the way. The headlight coil key switch is going to run on the left side because we have the Gasbox top motor mount is what we're going to be using for the key and the coil. It puts it in a great place right on the top of the motor. This is what I would suggest running with this kit. With running the coil, since it's going to be mounting the coil upside down from what it would be stock, you can see the badge on the coil. This is a single fire coil, so there's 4 pins. The signal wire has been swapped so that one lead goes to the front and this lead goes to the rear without having to actually twist the wires. We just switched which one fires and when because it is single fire. It's not a dual fire coil. So we've got this one on the backbone, and we're going to just continue slipping the other wires through. Like I told you before, the ignition on the left, the fuel injection on the right. Fuel injection's a little tricky, you got a lot of plugs, but just slip them under the oil tank, you'll be able to get it through. Just be careful, especially if you got a nice painted oil tank, don't scratch it up too much. It might be nice if you don't even have the oil tank installed, but we already have oil and everything in this oil tank, which is why I'm running it around it. But it's not really that big of a deal, you'll be able to do it. I got the fuel injected stuff run under the frame rail. Just wanted to point out there's another line that's running on the backbone. This is for the gas tank. It's a fuel injected gas tank with a vent coming out the bottom, and this is exactly how it is stock. There's a tube internal of the tank that runs to the top of the filler neck, and this attaches to that tube and goes to a one-way valve to atmosphere out of the bottom of the frame. I would suggest hooking this up as if it was a stock bike using your same one-way valve. You can even reuse your little elbow and just add a piece of hose to be able to route this to where you need it to go. But this is how it was stock, and I would suggest copying something like this. But that's also going to be on the backbone. We're running the fuel injected stuff up to the backbone as well. And so we'll be able to start plugging that in. I've got my throttle position sensor, which you'll be able to tell by the colors in your service manual. That's going to run to the bottom and plug up underneath. And most of these, it'll be pretty easy to figure out where they go because they'll only plug in one spot. The only two plugs on this whole harness that you can get backwards and still be able to plug everything else in are these two right here, which go to your injectors. So right here, we've got our rear injector is a green with gray and a yellow with green. Yeah, yellow with green, I should know that. And then the front injector is a white with yellow. So you can see right here, yellow with green, which is, it's the like the signal wire it has, that's power coming in. And so that's the same color on both. But here's our white with yellow, which makes this the front injector. And then green with gray makes that the rear. Like I said, these are the only two things that can be plugged in backwards and everything's still fit. These just push in when you install them, but to get them off, you push this down, which pulls those apart. There's two little tangs on the portion that's on the throttle body. And so just pushing it down like that spreads that. You'll just push it like that and be able to yank these off when you're trying to remove it. As you can see, that's the front injector installed with the white with yellow and yellow with green tracer. It just pushes down and snaps in. You'll have to, it's definitely directional. You'll have to, it'll look just like this when you install it, but there's a little notch that when it's unplugged, you'll be able to see which way it goes if you just have to line them up. So this is the rear injector. It's the green with gray and the yellow with green, and try to match up that in orientation when you plug them in, and just make sure that that little metal tang, that you push it on far enough that it spreads and then it'll snap back into place when you know you got it in. Make sure that you won't be able to pull that off. So we got the plug for the map sensor, and clearly it's like a wider plug which goes to basically the top of the throttle body, and that just pushes in. You'll hear it click when it snaps in all the way. So this one here is your map sensor, and plugged in and in the location at the top of the throttle body. We have the idle air control actuator, and that plugs into the back right here. This looks very similar to the one for the throttle position sensor, but this one has 4 pins. The one for the throttle position sensor has 3, but they look just the same, like a Delphi plug. And this one here is the idle air control actuator, which plugs in right at probably the highest point on your throttle body. And both of these are going to the gas tank. So we're gonna start hooking up the coil, the ignition wires, and we're gonna wait for the headlight. We're gonna do these two first. I mentioned before that I switched the orientation of the signal wire for the front and the rear cylinders because this is a single fire ignition for this model. The coil is meant to go the other way, and so these two wires are the power, and then the other two are the signal wires. So flipping these allowed me to flip the coil over and have the leads come out the bottom of it without having to crisscross these leads. If you don't mount this in this orientation, you'll have to crisscross your leads, or you could flip-flop these two wires, the yellow with the blue and the blue with the orange. If you flip-flop those two, you'll be able to mount this the 180 degrees different without having to cross your leads. This, I think, is about as clean as it gets for how to mount your coil on your Sportster. And so the coil wire comes in from the top and has to slip through this hole. You'll be able to bolt that in, clip that in right to the coil, and then still be able to push this through and bolt it on. You'll have to remove the coil to be able to unplug it. You won't be able to have this bolted in and plug it in, or be able to remove this plug with the coil bolted on. So we can go ahead and actually finish installing the coil. So I got the lowbrow weatherproof key switch. This is my go-to anytime I'm building a bike. It's really just a bulletproof switch. I've had these things fail before. Not this one specifically. Key switches fail in the past, but this one has just never let me down. So it's always my go-to. Even if it's not a crank start bike or something with electric start, I just run it anyways. It's just got a nice bezel on it. It's just great to use, and it's for marine use mostly, so it can withstand any kind of storm that you're going to have to deal with. But you'll be able to find these on the website, and it has a diagram that will also come with the part for every portion or every terminal on the key. And so you'll see a lot of terminals. Some we're not even going to use on this part, but there's a diagram there's a lot of different things. It's a very multi-use switch. So refer back to the diagram if you want to really get your money's worth out of running this thing on your bike. Each terminal has a letter corresponding to it. I'm going to tell you where all of these go. On the ignition switch, you'll see just as stock, the same wires with the addition of one more wire, because we don't have anything running on the handlebars like a stock bike. So we're actually moving your starter button from the handlebars from your stock bike to your key. So we have the addition of one wire. So we have one red wire, we have a red with black tracer, red with gray tracer, and a black with red tracer. First off, the red wire is straight from the battery, which is going to go to the B on the switch. So we're going to bolt that in. If you ever over tighten one of your terminals, you can always nut it on the back side. It's also just kind of a fail-safe, not a bad option to do. These tangs are really thin and you can strip out super easy, so just grab a nut and throw it on the back side. Just to reiterate, we got the solid red to battery. You might have to pull back the loom just the tiniest bit to be able to see what color it is, because it might look black if you have it covered up. That's just the shrink. So solid red to battery, which is B. And then we've got two wires that are going to go on the same terminal, which one is going to be our ignition circuit, and then the other one is the accessories, which is like lights and everything else, which these get separated in our fuse box, but are switch power from the switch. And so those get bolted on to A. So we got the red with gray and the red with black to A, and you can see right now I got these loose because I got to kind of feed it in place, and I also want to, when I tighten them up, I want them to be routed nicely to come out of the back of the switch nice and flow to the backbone nicely. So I got them loose for right now, but they're on the switch. And so the only other one left to do is the one that's going to go to the starter relay in the fuse box, and that's just going to be the momentary portion of the crank, which is operated by the terminal marked S. And so I'm going to bolt that on there. It says on the wiring diagram that that's what you put to the starter relay. Okay, I got that just lightly fed into place, and I'm going to I wonder if I can get this all tight in place. You might definitely hold the wires as you turn. I think I can get to all the wires with it in place. Yeah, I'm gonna put that. Okay. Oh, okay. See, I got them coming out kind of in a nice manner, just out the back of the switch and up to the backbone. And then I have the bulb out of the headlight bucket, and so we can actually just run that into the back side of the bucket into the grommet. We'll wait to wire this part, but this is just going to be up and out of the way. We could even throw some zip ties on it, but we got to get the gas tank on so we can finish the portion around the oil tank. So I got the gas tank back on, and I'd like to mention this is a Lowbrow Customs EFI Frisco mounted Sportster gas tank. It comes with the fuel pump mount in the bottom of it. You'll have to take that out of your stock bike to install it in the bottom, and also has the vent tube up front, which you can use portions of, like I would save that elbow, and then also your one-way valve when you install this on your bike. But just it gives you like all the reliability of EFI, but like an old chopper look, which is which is really cool because all the EFI stuff is just really big right now. Like I'm sure you've seen your stock tank, that thing is hideous. But so just a cool look, make it look like an old vintage chopper, but have all the fuel injected stuff. Now that the tank's on, we've got the lead coming from the fuel pump, which we need to plug in under the seat. So in the same way, we have to kind of slip the oil tank a little forward. And I like to wrap this on the inside of my ignition. I think this loom looks nicer than the loom on the stock lead for the fuel pump. So now we got that in there, we can kind of slip the oil tank back and we can plug that in. Try to just tidy this up as best you can in here. It's going to be a little tricky. Oh, there we go. There we go. Oh, this is for your fuel pump. This is the fuel pump resistor, which is what turns on your gas light when it goes low, which I'll show you in the headlight. There's a wire going to the headlight, which you can install a tiny little LED so that when your fuel is low, the sending unit sends a signal through the two resistors in here to turn that tiny little LED on. And so it would be on your dash stock, your Speedo, it would have a little gas light that would pop up, but we added a wire going to your headlight bucket with just a tiny little LED that'll light up when your gas gets low. So I've got the oil tank bolted in, and I just wanted to show you how I tried to make this as tidy as possible. You have a lot of stuff going on under the oil tank, but just try to tuck it in and make it look nice as possible. Even though the seat's going to cover all this up, it just still looks good. So as you can see, I crimped on that yellow wire onto the red part of the LED. I picked up that LED just from any auto parts store. It actually was able to, when I popped out the little blue cap in the back of this headlight bucket, it fit in perfectly and I didn't have to drill anything out and just put the nut on the back. I had to run one wire to ground and I put the other one to this yellow wire you see here with a butt splice. That's gonna tell me my gas is low. And then you see this blue wire with the female butt splice and then this black wire with the male butt splice. They go corresponding to the other, like the green wire on this plug is the ground, and then the blue wire, which I ran up to a 3-position switch so that I could actually get high and low on my headlight since it is a high and low beam bulb. And so that's going to one side of the 3-position switch. I have to each one of these I have marked my ground, low, high. And so I was already there and I was gonna take this in and out, so I just added some butt splices to the back side of this. But the blue is the hot wire for your headlight and the black is the ground. And then the yellow for the gas gauge. Now that we have the oil tank bolted back in and we don't have to move this around anymore, I'm going to reinstall the rear O2 sensor and we'll be able to actually hook this up and finish wiring up this middle section. It's just really one plug. But make sure you get that tightened down. And then behind the back of the leads coming up, he kind of got this O2 sensor hidden. This lead comes from the back side of this whip that runs up to the fuse box into the back side of the oil tank. And so we got the rear O2 sensor. You can see the plug right here, the red with the yellow. And so that just plugs in here and it's going to tuck behind it to try to the whole goal of this was to try to just keep things real clean, real tidy. Try to hide this as much as possible because there's just so many wires. Okay, and then so after you plug that in, you can tuck that back in there. And there we go. So now everything's plugged in up top in where like behind the fuse box. We have up front. We have just a couple things left. We have the brake light switch and we have the battery, which are just a couple things. So we got the leads from one going to the starter and then one just going, this is the main on our fuse box. And so the stack up is with the cable, with that on top, and then I put a little washer underneath, this little spacer, and this stands it off the terminal just enough so that it can be mounted to the side and not the top. We're gonna be hooking up the positive first so that if you touch anything, you're not gonna spark. So we're leaving the negative unhooked for now. Hold on to your cables while you tighten it up. Same thing with the negative. We've got wire on top of the cable with a spacer behind. Watch out, make sure you don't touch the positive and also any other metal on the frame. Slip that back into place. I'm just gonna tighten this down, and as you can see, we jumped ahead. I just hooked up the brake light switch. What you didn't see, I hooked up the wires going to the brake light switch. These are the two wires in the harness that go for that you'll need to wire into the brake light switch. It doesn't matter which one you connect to which side of the brake light switch, because most of these have two matching wires coming out of the backside. I think this one had two red wires. I just covered everything up with shrink tube because I didn't want to be able to see the two red wires. So you just need to connect one of these wires to one wire coming out of the brake light switch, and same with the other wire. Butt connectors, solder with some shrink wrap. Just connect these nicely onto the backside of the brake light switch. Okay, I want more zip ties. I'm just strapping things down and just kind of securing things, just trying to keep it real clean. This is really the last step of actually hooking things up. And then I'm gonna talk about just a couple things I just wanted to mention once we get to just firing it up. So as you can see, there's a lot going on here, but there's a lot of wires on this bike. So this is as tidy as I'm really hoping to get out of it, because you're not really hiding anything. Once your frame's black, you probably won't even notice this anymore. But the only other option is to maybe try to do it custom through your frame and stuff like that. But honestly, good luck, it would be a lot of work. So I'm really happy with how this looks for being able to just hang a harness on your bike and be able to ride it. I think this is incredibly clean for the amount of wires that you need to make this bike run. So we're all hooked up. I'm gonna just kind of try to turn this bike on. I want to get close to the bike because I want you to be able to, hopefully my microphone could pick up the noise that the fuel pump makes. You might be able to hear like a buzz, kind of like a buzz when the fuel pump fires up, which if your fuel pump isn't turning on, your bike's not gonna run. So it's definitely something that I always listen to the first time that I would try to start a bike like this, because if the fuel pump doesn't kick on, you'll try to crank, and nothing's gonna happen. So we're gonna try to go. I'm gonna try to get close to it. Maybe you can hear it. And it just cut out. So maybe I could hear it start up, and it was just like a little whining noise. And if you were actually riding this as a stock bike, you should be pretty familiar with that sound. But that's definitely listen for that, because if you don't hear that noise, you got a problem. So there it goes. Hopefully you were able to hear that. Okay, I got headlight, tail light, brake light. Let's fire this thing up. All right. Yeah. Hell yeah, this is great. I'm really excited to take this thing for a ride now. So I hope you found this video helpful and informative, and that you can tackle this job now. But if you have any questions, please reach out. We're here to help you if you need us. So I haven't seen very many EFI Sportster choppers on the road yet. I think I've only can think of this one and one other like it. But I would love to see what you guys build out of stuff like this. So feel free to send us some pictures. We'd really love to check it out. You'll be able to find this wiring harness and every single part that you see on this motorcycle behind me at lowbrowcustoms.com. My name's Tim, and thanks for watching.